right, friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel, A Radical Relationship, where we are talking all things faith and all things lifestyle. We're back this week picking up in our Wisdom from Women in the Bible series. Let's make sure we get that. There it is. So back this week picking up in this series. It's been a couple weeks, but I definitely want to be sure that we remain consistent and finish this series out. In the meantime, though, if you haven't checked out a couple of the other videos that I've posted in between time, one, an interview with a friend by the name of Asia. She just kind of talks through her testimony leading us up to current day. And then a second video where NECA and I talk a little bit about balance in our different convictions. So definitely be sure to check those out. So this week in the book, we're diving into the story of Abigail. And Abigail can be found in 1 Samuel 25. And I kind of think of her situation as reminding us that we can endure a less than ideal situation and set ourselves up for success in the way that we respond. And we'll look at Abigail's example of that. So to kind of give a little backstory about Abigail, she was married to a man by the name of Nabal. And hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's Nabal. And the scriptures describe them in 1 Samuel 25, chapter 3. It says, "The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved." So a little bit of a difference, right, in their characters that's illustrated for us from the very beginning. And so you think, like, how did these two end up together? And it sounds like it was an arranged marriage, which was typical back in the day. So that's not really surprising. So the story picks up in 1 Samuel 25, where David sends some of his men to Nabal to basically say, hey, I hear that you're rich. I hear that you have a lot of sheep. Would you please, feed us, take care of us, do us the honor, especially given the fact that, like, your shepherds have kind of congregated in our land for X amount of time. We've made sure that nothing has happened to them. We've done them no harm. Do you mind returning the favor, because it's time for us to feast? And so basically, when Nabal responds in verse 9, he's like, am I supposed to take my bread and water and give it to men who come from I don't even know where? And so they went back and they told David basically that Nabal was like, y'all tripping. No, that ain't got nothing to do with me. And so David is like off with his head. Okay, who does he think he is? So one of Nabal's and Abigail's servants overhear everything that has happened. And so they run to Abigail to tell her, hey, he cutting up again. This is what happened. And so she sends, she prepares bread, she makes wine, and she sends things ahead of her with the servants to say, hey, go ahead of me and take this to David, kind of as like a peace offering. And then she follows. And so when she gets there, she asked him to forgive her husband, basically making amends on his behalf. And just goes on into this whole dialogue about, like, hey, don't let your anger overtake you. Accept these gifts as a sacrifice on Nabal's behalf. Do good so that good can be spoken of you, etc., etc., etc. So she's making a plea with this man, which does end up going well. So let's get into some of the things that I really appreciate about her character. In verse 18, it says she made haste. So she immediately sprung into action. She realized what was going on. So she didn't waste any time whatsoever. So one, the character of her husband, right? It's like, yikes, who would want to be married to a man like that? Literally described as harsh and badly behaved, and especially because she's described so differently. And so we can only imagine what she's already been enduring in the marriage, just being married to this man. And as I think about that, one of the videos that I wanted to plug here was my marriage and holiness video, because it talks about, you know, marriage can really be used to make you holy. And I think about Abigail and I'm like, wow, she's really allowed this marriage not to make her bitter, but to make her wise. So that's really amazing. It was noteworthy to me as well that the shepherd who came back and gave her the news felt comfortable approaching her, even though clearly he was never going to approach Nabal about it. And so it has to make us question, you know, what were the things about her character that the servant felt comfortable saying, hey, this is what's going on. So just give that a thought. And then she sent gifts ahead of her as a way to soften his heart, which was wise. Like before he was even going to see her, his heart was going to be softened by the things that she sent. And so that was kind of preparing the way. And so that was really wise. And it made me think about different advice that I had been given in my marriage about trying to find the opportune times, you know, like not choosing as soon as he get off work and it's been a long day and perhaps he's already in a bad mood, or, you know, something's already bothering him, not piling on. And, you know, debatable if I was the best at doing that. But the point is that, you know, she was wise enough to soften him up a little bit and then go in with her plea. So ladies, take note, okay? And then I put a note here to emphasize how she pointed David back to God. And this is in verses 26 through 31. And so she's pointing him back to, hey, do these things to honor God because of the ways that God has taken care of you. And so she's giving him very good reason, okay? Like she could say, like, she could try to use her beauty, she could try to use anything else, but she's like, no, because of who God is in your life, because of your commitment to God, spare us. And so on page 72 of the book, it said, it talks about how the results of her decisions also changed the course of her life. And so what ends up happening is that she goes back home. She tells her husband about everything that's happened. This man gets so spooked that he has a stroke or has a heart attack and dies. So he's out of the picture. And David comes in and swoops old girl up and she becomes his wife. And so it talked about how with a single action, she saved an entire household and completely changed the course of her life. She goes from being married to him to being married to David, a king. So, hello. Another takeaway that I had from this chapter was wisdom being paired with action and guided by love. And so you can have you can have wisdom, you can have action, you can have love, but if the three don't all coexist, then you're not as effective as you can be. So you can have action with no wisdom. Well, now you're probably getting yourself into a less than ideal situation because you're not being wise about it. Or you can have wisdom and be guided by love, but if you don't put any action with it, then it don't really matter. And so Abigail is a great example that she used wisdom, she sprung into action, and she had the right motives going into it. And so that's a really great recipe for success, specifically in this situation as you're trying to appease and trying to sort of resolve conflict. She could have acted with indignation, right? She could have looked at her husband and just been like, this fool, you know, and just kind of got caught up in that train. But she didn't. And then the chapter talked about how leaders know how to appeal to the whole person. She prepared food, she prepared wine, and then she pointed him back to God. So he was gonna be like taken care of on all levels, okay? Make sure that man is fed, make sure he, you know, feeling a little good, and then remind him of who his Lord is. So page 78, and this will be the last point that I make before we dive into a couple of the questions. It says that, I was trying to find the exact verbiage, but it talks about how she was humble but not timid. It says Abigail was humble when she confronted David, but she wasn't timid. She addressed him boldly, challenged his thinking, and offered him a different and better path. And that took guts because David was a mighty warrior and God's anointed leader. She had no status at all, yet she spoke clearly and boldly, and that made the difference. Yeah, and so when I was writing down my notes, I wrote, wow, you know, often I think of humility and being timid as one and the same. And I often connect the two because being strong is tied to, it can be tied to a confidence that has kind of a negative connotation. But she was bold and also humble. And I can, like I said, kind of get the two confused, that to be bold or to be confident automatically means there's pride, and not necessarily. Like, she was just speaking truth to this man. And David, in his humility, received that. And so I just wrote down how I've struggled with how I can be true to my personality and whatever confidence and boldness that comes with that without being too much or without being viewed as non-submissive, etc., etc. If y'all are deemed strong women, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And so I appreciated that she had accomplished this balance, and probably because of the man that she had been married to is what gave her that, because even though he was foolish and harsh and bad behaved, like, she still had to submit to him. She still had to honor God in her interactions with him, but it don't mean that she had to take no mess. And so I appreciate what I can infer from how his character kind of built that up in her, that I can still be humble and I can still honor God, but what you're not going to do is talk crazy to me. Okay? Love that. And then there was a quote from the book that says, wisdom is only as powerful as the gentle action that follows it. And we talked a little bit about that recipe for success. So the two questions at the end of the chapter that I wanted to highlight to end out here were questions number 3 and 7. When you find yourself in what feels like a no-win situation, as Abigail did in her marriage to a foolish and bad man, how do you naturally tend to respond? So again, doing that introspection to be like, okay, do I feel like because of the other person's error or because of the ways that I know the other person is wrong, that gives me the right to respond in a certain way, because it doesn't. And again, responding in the right way doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be harsh or that you have to be prideful, but you can be confident, you can be bold, and you can be humble. So great question to consider. And then number 7, is there a decision you believe God is currently asking you to make? What wisdom are you seeking from God and mature fellow believers? I really love that, because it kind of feels like there was just something ingrained in Abigail, that wisdom, because she responded quickly and knew how to go about and approach this situation. But when we have time and we don't have to respond in such haste like she did, to make a decision about something, how are we attempting to exercise wisdom? Who are we going to for advice, and how are we trying to kind of mesh the advice with the scriptures to be sure that we are making a God honoring decision in humility and love? So I really appreciate the story of Abigail, because it's such a reminder to me of, another great example of the kind of woman that I want to be, especially, like I said, in her boldness and her being able to be confident in her approaching David as a king or leader, and just being so on point with how she approached them that he could hear her and that her heart could be softened, that his heart could be softened. And that's just something that I've been looking to grow in for a while now. So I appreciated the reminder of this example. All right, so per usual, wow, hopefully that was helpful to somebody out there. So we're going to get back on track with finishing out this series with the weekly videos coming to you. And I think Abigail is halfway. She's the halfway point through the book, maybe. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 more chapters. So 4 more weeks before we're all set. So until next time, folks, we are out. Bye, y'all.